Are we ready for everybody?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Well, good evening and welcome to the December 2nd, 2020 Board of Zoning Appeals meeting. The first item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Wayne has a flag. I will cover my mic and lead us, or cover my camera and lead us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is attendance. Wayne, will you be covering that?
We'll take care of that.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Papa?
Present.
Mr. Jones?
Present.
Mrs. Campins?
Present.
Mr. Mundy?
Present.
Mr. Wolf?
Present. Thank you, Wayne. The next item on our agenda is the approval of the November 4th, 2020 meeting minutes, which were submitted to you in your packet. Any discussion, additions, corrections amongst the group?
No.
Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
I'll move approval.
Thank you, Mr. Papa. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Ms. Campins. Wayne, I think we should continue to do these via roll call.
Certainly. Mr. Papa?
Aye.
Mr. Jones?
Aye.
Mrs. Campins?
Aye.
Mr. Mundy?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye. Thank you. The minutes are approved as submitted. Next item on our agenda, you know what, let's pause there and let's see if we can recognize if any of our audience members wish to raise their hand to be recognized or counted as being participating in our meeting. Roger, I'll turn that over to you.
Thank you. Yes, those in attendance, if you want to be recognized, please raise your hand, which would be one of the icons on the lower portion of your screen. We have John Towsley, Sally Zalonis, Mark Walters, Eva Tomlinson, Todd Rotman, Jeff Sepiol, Drew Kogan, Matt Price, Chelsea Overbeck. I believe we've got them.
Roger, thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is continuance requests. Is there any of our petitioners here tonight who seek or are going to ask or seek more time before they present their petition? If so, please raise your hand and recognize it to Roger.
Mr. Wolf, no hands are shown.
Thank you. Next item would be continued business, of which we have none, which drives us to new business. The first item on our agenda tonight is docket number 2020-33-SE for the property located at 112 South Main Street. I am going to recuse myself from this petition. So Mr. Papa, as we briefly discussed via email, I'm going to ask you to lead this one. I think, Roger, is it appropriate? Do you want me to turn off my camera and mic, or do you want to handle that?
I can handle that.
Perfect. Just for clarity purposes. In the meantime, if the petitioner will please come forward and we'll get started. Thank you.
Good afternoon or good evening.
Good evening.
Hello.
Thank you for hearing us today.
Mr. Sepiol, if you could please give your name and address, please.
Yeah, Jeffrey Sepiol, 775 Eagle Creek Court, Zionsville. The business is 112 South Main, Zionsville, Indiana.
You'd like to describe the petition before us?
Yeah, the petition is to be approved to have a variance for outdoor dining. Our plan is to have potentially have an outdoor dining space to the south of our dining room above the it would be a second floor roof terrace where the acre's true value is.
And what are the variances that you're asking for? What would they do? What would they accomplish?
Well, from what I understand, the variance I'm requesting is to be approved to have outdoor dining, which is what I was told at the beginning of this process. I had to get the variance to be able to serve food and beverage outdoors.
Okay. Are there any questions from the members of the board at this time? There aren't any questions for the representative yet. Then, Roger, do we have anyone wishing to speak in the public?
If any of the attendees would like to speak on this, if you would please raise your hand. Do have Mr. Drew Cogan has raised his hands. I will move him, allow him to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. Jeff does a
My-
great job. My only concern, and this is what you've passed with Salty Cowboy, is the parking. I mean, parking is such an issue. We have a restaurant with no parking. They're growing their parking or growing their seating, which means more employees. And again, no parking. You know,
Mr. Cogan, just for the record, could you state your address?
oh, I'm sorry, 195 South Main Street.
Okay. Do you have other concerns as well, or just the parking issue?
It's the parking. I mean, it's just, I mean, something, you approved Matt Price's basement with parking down at, you know, across from Bub's. Restaurant employees park on Main Street, on Pine Street, and the parking lot. All you have to do is come and sit someday, and they park on Main Street, Pine Street, and the parking lot all day long, which hurts all our businesses. I mean, something that's got to be addressed. This is nothing against you, Jeff. I like your hot dogs, like your potato chips. I mean, but it's just the parking issue has got to be, I don't understand why the zoning appeals keeps approving things when parking is the number one issue. If you hear my customers, I'm sure Jeff's, I mean, parking is an issue. And Jeff, your employees park on Main Street all day long, right across the street from me. I don't think you realize that. You
Yeah,
know?
I certainly don't, and we address it.
And as soon as the
on
3
regular.
o'clock shift leaves, the 3 o'clock Salty Cowboy shift comes in and takes over the spots. All you have to do is sit on Main Street someday and see this. They park in the parking lot, the first available spaces. I see it. I sit out front and have my coffee in the morning. You know, I mean, something's got to be done. I mean, and I don't know what can be done. There's nothing against Jeff. Rush is a great asset to Main Street. I mean, I support it. I eat there, but I don't know. That's my concern. You asked, you know, but I mean,
Yeah, I
you know,
think I think this
they
may
have
be
no
addressed when we
parking.
get
We're
into it.
expanding their dining, which means more employees, more customers, and no more parking.
But I think that may be addressed when we get into the staff report, because the argument is it's not an expansion in capacity, but we'll get to that when we get to the staff report. Are there members of the board have other questions or comments for Mr. Cogan?
I mean, it's not a comment directly at Drew, but it's just a general comment about parking in the village. I'm a developer. My goal is to create parking problems, because if there's a parking problem, that means we have an activity problem. There's too many people wanting to come and take advantage of the businesses and services being offered in the area. I think the real fix for this is for the village association to get together with the merchants and come up with a plan, because that's who it benefits. We're going to hear a little bit later about another issue. Same thing, it's going to come up about parking. But, you know, when you talk about the Zionsville historic or the Zionsville village, you're talking about a center, an area that's actually fully integrated in the community. I mean, it's got good street access, it's got parking, it's got access via trails, it's got access via neighborhoods. You know, as an individual who's been here for 20 years and comes downtown to do different things, you know, I'm used to making a loop to find some parking. I think it's a good thing that businesses are busy enough that it's an issue. If it's not an issue, you've got a different problem. That means you don't have enough traffic to support the businesses, to support the town. So once again, I don't, in this situation, you know, the village area operates like a PUD, a planned urban development, where we would take a PUD and look at it from the standpoint of, you know, along with the commercial aspects, are there residential aspects? How integrated is the PUD to the rest of the adjoining areas, neighborhoods, town? So when it comes to parking issues, like I said, I'm all for them. That's something the village association needs to come together and address on their own, because they are the ones that are truly affected.
Larry, we've tried that. An email went out in October from the chamber about stores and employees parking. Did no good. So, you know,
Then it's not enough of a problem then that the people who are most affected are willing to come together to come to solution.
I totally disagree with you. I mean,
That's
this
fine.
is
I
your
understand.
job to protect us. I mean, this is why we have an appeals board. Not everything has to pass.
I understand.
And how, Wayne, you're muted.
Yes, yes.
How
I'm here.
many, I asked you this when Mr. Price went for down below and you never answered me. How many parking spaces should Rush have?
Well, the parking ratio is based upon the square footage of the restaurant divided in half. The petitioner's parking analysis indicates they have a seating capacity of 112. So Roger, if you have we can do a quick calculation and discuss all the parking in totality here when we do our staff report.
Yeah, that may be more helpful. Are there other questions from the board for Mr. Cogan before we move to the staff report?
No.
Okay. Who's doing the staff report? Is it Roger or Mr. Kilmer or Mr. DeLong?
I will provide the staff report, and certainly I can speak right to Exhibit 5, which is within your staff report, which is the petitioner's parking analysis. But I do want to clarify while I'm flipping to Exhibit 5 here, is that the petition in front of you is a special exception. The special exception has specific criteria related to the findings. The project itself, you know, staff finds that the findings are met to support the special exception, but we fully recognize that parking is the #1 concern with any business expansion. And certainly in the petitioner's parking analysis, they discuss the fact that due to COVID, their desire is to push an element of their dining to be experienced outdoors. And as a consequence of that push to send dining outdoors, the balance interior would be reduced in the same manner, in essence, to provide the spread that's currently being required for restaurants and other businesses to facilitate the retail trade and service. Certainly staff recognizes that, ultimately recognizes there is no increase in parking due to the configuration of the outdoor space versus the indoor space. Certainly, we also recognize that when this is over and we go back to a new normal, there could be a desire to intensify the parking interior, which would be different than what this board is considering this evening, same as the recommendation. Certainly, again, the staff is supportive of this petition, certainly recognizing the petitioner's Exhibit 5 that speaks to the parking analysis for this particular project. And I'm happy to take any questions while I read through additional notes.
Well, Wayne, when this is all over, that is, when restaurants and other gathering spaces return to normal numbers, would anything be required in a way of parking if this were approved this evening?
In staff's review and as captured in the staff report, since there is no increase in seating, there is no intensification in the parking demand. But certainly in the future, if there was an increase in the seating beyond what is currently within the restaurant, then yes, there you would find additional requirements that would need to be met.
I think that's reflected in the recommended motion, isn't it, Wayne?
Correct.
So that will be in the record.
Any more discussion?
I think we're waiting on the staff report, right?
No.
Well, I have provided staff is supportive of the petition. The seating capacity in the restaurant is 112. In the village, you reduce all parking requirements by 150. I do want to read exactly from the ordinance, exactly what it says, and I'm working to get those exact letters in front of me. I don't know if Roger, if you can do it a little bit faster.
I do have the numbers. The zoning ordinance requires one parking space for every 3 seats in a restaurant like this. But because it is also located within the village business district, that final number is reduced by 50%. The result being 19 parking spaces would be required to support the 112 seats within Rush on Main. Those 19 parking spaces have to be located within 300 feet of the perimeter of the building. Somewhere they obviously do not have to be on site, but they do have to be within 300 feet of the building.
So Roger has given the technical answer to the question. However, that does not honor the historic use of this building as a restaurant for Gisla's, Plum's, other restaurants that have been in the facility, 120. And all of those restaurants have perpetuated the historic non-conforming status that Rush on Main now currently enjoys. So again, Roger Kilmer has given the technical answer based upon the standards of the ordinance. However, there's a different chapter in the ordinance that speaks to the non-conforming status, which is something that's enjoyed today, like many businesses enjoy in the village, in the downtown area, and Rush on Main continues to perpetuate that. Now, again, if there was an intensification, that would be a different conversation, hence why the staff report is structured in a very specific way, and the recommendation in front of you is structured as well to mimic that language.
And maybe to support Drew a little bit is we're not tone deaf to what you're saying. I mean, when we approved Hotel Tango, we understood that they had an existing building, they were making a more intense use. So we did place a certain amount of restrictions as to what additional development could go on there. So it's kind of a case by case basis, but when you get right down to the hard center of the village, it's just tough to come up with any changes. And the supported piece is we're basically, enabling a previous use to maintain its, what are we doing? We're enabling a current use to maintain a use that it's previously always had. So we're not really technically adding a much more intense use to the village business district. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, my understanding was their capacity is half because of the spreading out for COVID precautions. So they're just moving outside. They're not really adding any numbers that they would have had prior to March.
But we all know if it's a nice place, he'll want to keep it, regardless of what COVID's doing to it.
But he'll have to come back for that, right?
Correct.
Mr. Papa, I would like to draw your attention. Mr. Cogan has raised his hand and would like to speak again.
Okay, you can promote him again.
I'm not, it's fine. It's just, Jeff, again, it's nothing personal. I'm concerned about parking. I wish you guys would come down there some morning and sit and sort of see what really happens, and see, how this all hurts all of us. I mean, every single one of us, it hurts. Sit out there, see the employees park there, and then come back at noon and watch people drive around and then leave because they can't find a place to park. I mean, you guys don't spend any time down here to see what goes on. I just don't understand how you can vote on something that you really have no clue. I mean, and we've tried, Larry, to get people to park away.
I understand.
I don't, I mean, I've gone to Z-Works and begged them. I mean, they have parking in the back and they don't use it. I mean, if you want all bars and restaurants, that's great. But just let the rest of us know.
Well,
Because that seems,
and that's actually kind of my point is I don't want the village to go to all bars and restaurants, but we've got to figure out a way to keep a certain amount of density and people coming there.
I mean, Larry, we hung out in Broad Ripple and now you can't find a place to go in Broad Ripple to park.
Right.
And we don't go there anymore.
No.
I mean, it's a concern.
Yeah.
I just don't understand it. That's my 2 cents. It's nothing against Rush. I mean, I think a rooftop dining would be great. I think it's a cool idea. But the parking thing everything has been passed, with no parking. The rule 300 feet, you said, from the entrance, and Matt Price got his underground to park down across from Bub's. How many events has he had? You guys don't have a clue. You need to come down here and see what's going on.
But Drew, as I recall, the parking down at Bub's was going to be valet parking, that people would pull up there and someone would take their car. Yes, they would move it more than 300 feet away, but that was the arrangement that was made.
Yeah. Has it happened?
Well, I don't think there's been a lot of events held any place, so I'm not sure. I can't tell you if it's never happened or if it's happened at all, but that was, again, the agreement that was made.
Yeah, that's fine. Guys, I gave my 2 cents. I respect what you do. I respect Jeff. I'm just telling you, as a property owner and a business owner, how I feel. I mean, I really wish someday you can call me, email, I'll fix you a cup of coffee, sit out front and see what happens. I mean, yeah, how much revenue is lost when my customers can't get to me? And I have older customers, I mean, you guys don't have a clue that at Pine Street and Main Street, Pine from Elm to First Street is employee parking all day long. I mean, that's the major corner of the town. Come take a look. It's the same cars. I can go out there now, 2:30, 3 o'clock. It's all Salty Cowboy and Lower Grant's employees. Right there, they come at 3 o'clock as soon as the 3 o'clock shift parks. So, you know, how much are we losing? How much revenue are we losing? You need to get to come and take a look. That's all I'm asking. You know, it's hurting us. And it's not like you don't go to Broad Ripple because you can't find a place to park. But I mean, please
These
tell
are
me
good
if you want-
comments for the, these are good comments for the big picture, but are you disputing that? I mean, I'm not arguing with you, but you understand the theory of the ask here is they're not asking for more capacity, just spreading out because of COVID.
Yeah. But they should, I mean, but you know what, Wayne, I mean, when Giesels went through, zoning appeals was a lot stricter, and I know they had places to park. I don't know what's happened to that. But, you know, so maybe go back and check where they were supposed to park if Wayne's bringing up Giesela's and Plums. But when Steve Akerd lived above where Rush is now, and it became Giesela's, they had to provide parking somewhere. I don't know what's happened to it. You know, but it did. Okay, thank you
You have other
guys. I'm
comments?
sorry. Again,
Well,
I'm
Those
sorry.
are good thoughts.
Merry Christmas.
Kogan.
I
Thanks.
mean, it's because I care. I'm not fighting. It's because I care. So, thanks.
Okay, thank you for your comments, Mr. Kogan. Any more discussion amongst the board or anything we missed? Mr. DeLong or Mr. Kilmer?
I have a question for the petitioner if we're ready to go back to him.
Let's do that. Can we bring our petitioner back or representative?
Yep, I'm here.
Mr. Sepio, I think in your comment section here in your application was that you had identified and arranged for parking for 4 of your staff that could be used after, and I don't remember what the exact time, but
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Mr. Mundy. So Dr. Brown has allowed us to tell staff that after his business closes, that we could use the 4 spots there. So that would incorporate 3 of our kitchen staff. We only have 3 kitchen staff on busy nights and only 2 on weeknights. So say on a Friday, it would be 2 kitchen staff member, or 3 kitchen staff members, and then the 4th would be either a host or somebody else that works for us, which would leave roughly 4 other employees that have to find parking elsewhere. And that was about all I can find.
yes, I know, I understand. But I think to address Mr. Kogan's comments, that the employees, just like the customers, would like to park right outside the door and walk right in. And probably the employer is the only one that can push them away from those spots and say, here's where you need to park. Now, I don't know that I should suggest that you do that, because I think if you do it, everyone else should do it too, and try to get their staff to park so that the El Primo parking is there for the customers to use. But it is a thought that, you know, if you've got arrangements for those, and I think those are only in the evening, isn't that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so you wouldn't have that luxury for your staff to park at lunchtime, but nonetheless, it would move some of the people who may be parking right in front to another location and leave it open for customers.
Yeah, I agree. We we have pushed for our staff for a few years now to not park on Main Street at all. And Drew, thanks for joining. I appreciate your comments. I appreciate your genuine care for the village too. It's merchants that have that make it a great place. Anyway, you know, I am unaware that of any of our staff that is currently parking on Main Street. I'll certainly address it after hearing it again today. But you know, the problem with a restaurant is people are walking out in the evenings specifically, and they have cash on them. So, you know, we don't want to say, hey, you know, go to 4th Street and park and just walk. It's just not a safe thing, even though we're in a safe town. I can say this too, that this pandemic has raised the parking issue to an even higher level, in my opinion, simply because merchants, I would guess, are making less. We all are. So now one parking spot is worth more than it was a year ago. But I can also say that in the past 3 to 4 weeks, I have not seen a parking problem in the village because of probably the pandemic. I've driven by and there are more open spaces on Main Street from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. the last 3 weeks, and there have been cars parked. We went to the village to eat last weekend at Noah Grant's, and we parked right in front of Noah Grant's, and we got there at 6 p.m. So currently, I think the problem has resolved a little bit for the wrong reasons, but hopefully it will come back as a problem. And as Larry alluded to earlier, that's a great problem. It still is a problem. And I'd love to be a part of the solution. I will certainly make sure to the best of my ability that our team members don't park on Main Street. And we'll actually, you know, I'm fine with trying to move them away from that lot. And not all of them actually park there either, but some do for sure. And I think we all have a good enough rapport at Rush where they're going to want the open spaces for themselves as well. You know, for our customers to come in. That's how our staff makes money. So I'll certainly be happy to address it. I certainly appreciate the parking problem. As Larry said, it is a better problem to have than too many open spaces on a regular. But I would love to participate in any way I can to help resolve the village parking issue. You know, any way I can help, really.
Any other questions for the petitioner? Or further discussion amongst the board? Mr. Kilmer, we don't have an issue with or Mr. DeLong, we don't have an issue with the mailing, right? It was certified.
We should go ahead and if you want to address it for actually all petitions tonight, if you want to address it that way, we can do that.
But this one, I think the petitioner used certified mail, didn't he?
Correct.
So we can do that after that. We don't, I was just verifying we didn't need to do that for this petition, but that's what I was going to ask if we did, but okay. So other discussion? Or are we ready for a motion? If not,
I would like to put out one quick thing. I've been sitting there scrolling through the aerial supplied with the package, as well as, you know, good old fashioned Google Earth. And if everybody takes a minute and look at the aerial, it has to be a noon regular business day. And there's a lot of parking. So really what we have is an issue that it's probably weekends and evening nights and that kind of stuff. So it's not like it's a 24/7 parking problem for the village. There is going to be peaks, you know, weekend nights, and I'm sure Saturday afternoons, which are also peaks for business for, you know, for Drew as well. But if we all just take a minute and look at the information provided in the package we've got sitting in front of us, there's a lot of parking. And I just quizzed my daughter who works at one of the chocolate shops in town. Where does she park? And they have them parking around back, so they've got spots for their employees. So it's, like I said, I'll stand by my original statements, but I think as we, it's all about perspective. And I understand Drew's position and where he's located and what he's seeing, but I don't know. I think that we're probably better off to be having some parking problems than the other. That's it.
Other comments? Motions?
I'll do it. I move the docket number 2020-33 SE, a special exception petition to provide for a rooftop outdoor seating area associated with the restaurant in the Urban Village Business District, BBD, be approved based on the staff report and proposed findings as presented, subject to a reevaluation of the parking demand should the petitioner seek to increase indoor seating capacity when COVID restrictions for social distancing are lessened or removed. In terms of requirements associated with the zoning ordinance, the Indiana Building Code, and the road impact fee ordinance.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
Hampens?
Yes.
Thank you. Further discussion before we call the roll? Okay. Would staff like to call the roll, please?
Certainly. Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Ms. Campens,
Aye.
Mr. Mundy,
Aye.
Mr. Papa.
Aye.
You have a 4-0 approval.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we're ready to bring Mr. Wolf back.
Thank you, Mr. Papa. Note that the motion approved. The next item on our agenda is docket number 2020-35-SE for the property located at 7529 East State Road 32. Could we please promote the petitioner?
I'm promoting Eva and Jeff and Eva Tomlinson.
Yeah, good afternoon. This is Jeff Tomlinson and Eva Tomlinson at 14583 Stonegate Court in Carmel. The property that we're discussing is at 7529 East State Road 32 in Zionsville. Our petition is for an exception to place a residence on the property there. I believe it's zoned agriculture, and so we're looking to put a nice homestead on that property.
Very good. And are there, I don't see it in front of me. Oh, actually I did. You have the site plans, and included in that is the home that is being proposed, correct?
That's correct, yes.
I see it here now. And is this intended to be your residence? It doesn't matter, but just out of curiosity, is this intended to be your residence?
We're hoping to retire there, yes.
Very good. And can you describe the placement of the home on the parcel?
Actually, the home is actually placed more center of the 14 acres. It's kind of on a hilltop there behind the pond. It's approximately 600 feet back from State Road 32, 300 feet inboard from the south property, and approximately 200 feet either side, to the adjacent properties.
So as I looked at it, it looked like it was pretty close to being center as you could get it. Was there a purpose for that, or was it just spacing, or?
It was actually, it is on the hilltop. We had a particular view of the southwest, which is, I guess, more of a floodplain area, but it's to just a real nice view. And then that puts us behind the pond where we wanted to be. We do want to demolish the existing barn that's there. And then we'll have a updated workshop barn beside the house.
Okay. And through the landscaping and driveway plans, the intent is that the pond will remain there and continue to serve. Yep, okay,
Yes.
wonderful. At this time, do we have any other questions for the petitioner?
Are all the adjoining parcels zoned agricultural?
Maybe note that
Shaking his head, yes.
the staff may be better equipped to answer that.
I believe so, yes.
Is this property currently being farmed?
It is. We currently have about 8 acres of hay, and we actually want to continue to have about 6 acres of hay in the future.
Okay.
And for my fellow board members, I would note that, and Mr. Tomlinson, you correct me where I go wrong, but I would note that you have already filed with the county the Right to Farm Act, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So as we continue down this process, that is something that's already been taken care of. Any other questions for the petitioner at this time? Kind of seeing no lively action. Mr. Kilmer, do we have anyone who wishes to speak on this topic?
If there are any attendees that would like to speak to this project, please raise your hand. Mr. Wolf, there are no hands raised.
Thank you, sir. Which probably means it's time for the staff report.
Thank you. Staff is supportive of the petition as it's been filed and certainly appreciate the petitioner moving forward and agreeing and now executing the right to farm. I have to answer that question for the board this evening. Specifically, as indicated by petitioner, the property itself will continue to have some activity related to agriculture. Certainly that's supported by the district, certainly supported by the actions that are ongoing around the property. Certainly no mandate that the agricultural activity be maintained, but that's certainly good that the maintain production and certainly serving the community in that capacity as well. Again, staff is supportive of the petition as it's been filed, and I'll happily answer any questions.
Thank you, Wayne. Any questions? And if not, any discussion amongst the group?
I would just note, sorry.
Go ahead, Mr. Papa.
I was just saying now might be a good, well, I don't know if it's a good time, but I just want to point out again, like Mr. Kilmer noted, the rest of the petitions tonight use first-class mail, so you might want to.
Yeah, so why don't we pause our conversation real quick and is there a motion to amend our rules for tonight to allow for regular USPS mail in the light of COVID for everyone's safety?
So
I ask for a moment.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. Wayne, let's just make it official. Let's do a quick roll call vote so that we can amend our rules for the not using certified mail.
Certainly. Mrs. Campins?
Aye.
Mr. Mundy?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Papa?
Aye.
Mr. Jones?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Now we've got that out of our way. Is there any other discussion amongst the group or questions for Mr. Tomlinson? Mr. Tomlinson, do you anticipate any parking problems in your area?
Well, there's 14 acres, and so I think we can accommodate.
Okay, very good. If there's no discussion amongst the group, I would entertain a motion. And I would note that our motion, the recommended motion, does include the Right to Farm Act, which has already been executed and recorded with the county, so we can omit that portion of the recommended motion.
I'll move that docket 2020-35-SE, special exception petition in the agricultural district for the property located at 7529 East State Road 32 be approved based on the staff report and the proposed findings as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Papa. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Mundy. Wayne, I'm going to turn it over to you for a roll call vote, please.
Certainly. Mr. Mundy?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Papa?
Aye.
Mr. Jones?
Aye.
Mrs. Campbell.
Aye.
Very good. Motion carries. Mr. and Mrs. Tomlinson, good luck with your project going forward.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is docket number 2020-36-DSV for the property located at 320 West Hawthorne Street. Would you please promote the petitioner?
Working on that, I apologize.
No worries. I would note that Mr. Rotman is at the plate, Mr. Price is on deck, and Mr. Oakes is in the hole. Good evening, Mr. Rotman. Would you please state your name and address for the record? Oh, you're on mute. I see you moving, but I can't hear you talking.
Can you guys hear me now?
Gotcha.
All right. It's Todd Rodman, address 320 West Hawthorne Street.
Thank you, Mr. Rotman. Would you please describe what is in front of us tonight?
So I am here tonight because I do not have a time machine. If I had a time machine, I would go back and I would properly mark my western property line. For the 9 years that I lived there, the fence to me was the property line. I maintained the ground up to it, landscape, mowing, you name it. When it came time to move the shed, I did some measurements from the other corners of my property and realized that that fence was not exactly on the property line. It looked about 13 inches off. So I went and measured 13 inches off of the fence, assuming that was the property line, and then measured 5 feet off of that. But I was wrong about inches, and I was wrong about the being straight. It was actually at an angle. So in the end, the shed ended up being 2 feet, 1 inch too close to the property line. In discussions with my neighbor to the west, it was desired that we get a variance to keep the shed where it is and then move the pool equipment to the north side of the shed versus moving the shed the 5 feet and then having the pool equipment between the shed. The second item that I'm here for tonight, I think is kind of a gap in the current zoning ordinance. It states that fences are maximum 6 foot tall in a required yard. We have significant slope on our property of about 6 feet. And the fence has to step down. So there's portions of the fence that are as tall as 7 foot 7 inches above the property when it steps. With the 6 foot maximum height would make parts of the fence less than 5 feet tall, which wouldn't be in the best interest of the neighbors or myself. I've talked about that with the neighbor to the north and the neighbor to the west, who that fence affects, and they do not have any issues with the height. So I'm here tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Rodman. And as I look at Exhibit 4, what you're referencing, and I'm specifically looking at first picture, which is the view looking north. So the yard slopes. So at one side of a fence panel, you are probably within compliance. But as you go down the fence panel, because of the slope of the yard, you are no longer in compliance. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, that's correct. The eastern side of our property, we're at the 6 foot. And then when from the northeast corner, when we head west, that's where the slope occurs. So we start at 6 foot and then we step down continually as we head to the west.
Okay. And then I couldn't see it because I didn't want to climb over your fence. Didn't seem appropriate. Can you describe the size, I have a picture of it, but do you have any dimensions for the shed? I don't need specific, but just approximate.
8 by 16, actually 10 by 16.
10 by 16, okay. And the shed is on the, and how long has the fence been in place as it looks today?
A couple of months. It was August.
And at what point did you recognize the fact that the property lines weren't where you thought they were?
As soon as the pool equipment got installed, my neighbor questioned, and the fence posts got installed on that western property line. The neighbor brought it to my attention that he thought everything was too far over towards his property. And we did some quick measurements and it looked like it was. So subsequently, I hired a civil engineering company and a surveyor to come out and survey and stake the property. And so we now have that entire property line measured. And that's why I got these dimensions to know exactly how close it was to the property line.
Okay, very good. So we're comfortable with where we're at today, that the measurements are accurate. And just out of curiosity, was there a fence on the west side of the property prior to this?
Yes, the proposed new fence that we show here is within 3.5 inches of where the other fence was. One end is 3.5 inches over, and then we kicked it at less of an angle, but it's still at a little bit of an angle. So yes, there was a fence there.
Okay. Very good. What questions do we have for Mr. Rotman tonight?
I might have missed this, but how long has the shed been there? Placed there?
We moved the shed end of July, probably.
Okay.
Sometime in July.
Any other questions for the petitioner? Seeing none. Mr. Kilmer, is there anyone who would like to speak for or against this particular petition tonight?
If you'd like to speak on this matter, please raise your hand. Mr. Wolf, there are no hands raised.
Thank you very much. Wayne, I think we'll turn it over to you for the staff report.
Thank you. Staff is supportive of the petition as it's been filed this evening. Staff has specific comments we can provide on the fence and the articulation and the grade challenges that have been discussed. Specific to the accessory structure, as this board's well aware, the staff starts its review by looking in the immediate area, broadening that view as well to see if other properties in proximity enjoy deviations such as what's being requested. Certainly looking to see that others, is somebody else enjoying the very thing that's being requested or something similar. In this particular case, you do see that there are accessory uses that encroach into setbacks, certainly barring any interest or comments from adjoinders. Certainly we want to build that into the process as well. But as we have not heard anything specifically brought up, your hearing tonight as well is to provide that conduit. And certainly staff is here in support of the request, again, given the request is not out of compliance with what you find as the standard in the area. Specific to the fence, staff would agree with the petitioner. The fence standards that the town has do not take into consideration, for the most part, grade challenges and the desire to maximize screening regardless of a drop in grade. And that can present a challenge as articulated this evening by the petitioner, when you have a fence that follows grade and you're trying to also screen an outdoor living space that is desired to be screened. It can't be accomplished without shrinking the outdoor living space to a point that it might not be advantageous to be utilized as such, or potentially could provide echoing of some nature that is not intended at all. In this particular case, a fence is requested to be installed while, paying attention to the natural grade, while still maintaining a look and a feel that's, intended to be accomplished and certainly comparable to what you find in neighboring communities. Now, certainly this is a little bit different than how we propose thoughts to you, but certainly this standard is one that, we would want to give further thought to in incorporating into our own zoning ordinance. This is the first time I've seen this challenge come up in a face that it approaches the Board of Zoning Appeals, but I'm assuming that other folks in town have been challenged like this and have met the standard, maybe to their detriment. So we need to talk about this a little bit further. This is a great petition to start that conversation. Again, staff is supportive of the petitions as it's been filed, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. DeLong. Any questions for our staff?
No one from the public raised their hand, but we did have a letter from a neighbor, right? That was supportive.
Mr. Rodman, could you, that is correct. Mr. Rodman, could you describe who sent the letter in location to your property?
The property owner to the east and north. He adjoins part of my property.
Thank you.
It's the same property owner to the east and the north. Is that correct?
He is to my east, but his property extends further north than my property, so he adjoins my neighbor to the north as well.
And the neighbor to your west is the one that pointed out that he thought the post was in the wrong place. Is that correct? And that neighbor, obviously, I guess he doesn't have an issue with it, so he didn't at least remonstrate against it, but do you know that he's in fact happy with what's occurred now?
Yeah, he and I talked and kind of came up with what we would go after for the variance as far as not moving the shed and relocating the pool equipment as shown in the variance. So it was a joint effort to come to an agreement on what we wanted to see happen.
Very good. Any other questions or comments? And if not, I will entertain a motion.
Yeah, just one thing I wanted to bring up is the western fence is not installed, just the posts. We stopped installing that until we could figure out what to do. We may, our neighbor and I, may decide to put the fence on the property line instead of off the property line. That hasn't been determined yet. I don't think that has any impact on this, but I don't want to be held to the fence being on his property as shown if he would like it to be. And I just wanted to bring that up, that the fence location wouldn't affect this.
The variance being requested is off the true property line, correct?
Yeah, the fence is off the true property line by a couple feet.
Well, but it's the variance for the shed.
It's a variance for the shed, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's irrelevant where the fence is. I just didn't want to, I've got a fence shown on here where the posts are right now, but if that's not where the fence ends up, because the neighbor and I agree to move it onto the property line, I just wanted to make sure that this exhibit didn't limit where that fence could be located.
Don't believe that is addressed in our conversation, but Wayne, I just, for clarity's sake, and I'm going to put you on the spot, which I always do. Where can that fence be located? Can it be located on the property line?
Certainly, the ordinance as written allows for a 6-foot tall fence to be located in the side yards on the property line. The fence could be as tall as 8 feet if it's kept inside at a certain dimension and is meeting certain standards in the ordinance. So you can have a taller fence than 6 feet, but it has to meet certain standards and encroaches actually into your outdoor living space.
So, Mr. Rotman, as I review what we're discussed tonight, I don't think we discussed the location of the shed, but not the fence. The issue that we're discussing with the fence is where we exceed the height on, I think it's the north of the lot, I believe. So I think you're still in compliance there.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? And if not, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion. I move that docket 2020-36-DSV, petition for development standard variance to provide for 1, an accessory building which deviates from the required side yard setback, and 2, a fence which exceeds the permitted height in the urban residential village zoning district, RV, be approved as submitted.
Thank you, Mr. Mundy. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. DeLong, can I turn it over to you for a vote?
Certainly. Mr. Wolf,
Aye.
Mr. Papa,
Aye.
Mr. Jones,
Aye.
Mrs. Campins,
Aye.
Mr. Mundy.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries. Mr. Rotman, thank you for working with your neighbors and good luck with your time machine.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Next item on our agenda is docket number 2020-37 DSV for the property located at 10901 East County Road 300 South. Can we please promote the petitioner's representative?
Yes. Good evening. Very good to see you all. My name is Matt Price, and here this evening on behalf of Harris FLP and Bob Harris, the owner of the property and developer of Appaloosa Crossing, which is a mixed-use development at the corner of Michigan Road and 146th Street, the southeast corner. I am here this evening to request a variance to remove the requirement under the Michigan Road overlay zone for a 6-foot parking lot perimeter landscape area. And this is a variance that is consistent with, in fact, it's identical to the variance that we requested and obtained for a parcel within the same development further north back in March of this year. And so what we are attempting to do is maintain the same frontage and streetscape with regard to this proposal as we have with the initial building approved back in March. And if I could, I'd like to be able to share my screen and could acquaint you all with the property in a little more detail and then provide some very specific detail on the property and how it abuts Michigan Road in particular.
Roger, is that something we can manage? Looks like it is.
Roger and I are getting better at that with practice. Let me see if I can get my slideshow started here. So, first of all, I want to just show the outlot in question. It's outlot J, which is a 1.17 acre parcel along the south frontage of Michigan Road. There's one outlot further south, that's outlot K. And then if you'll see, US 421 is at the top of your drawing, as you see, and this same exhibit was actually provided in your packets and is included as part of the staff report. The building that's shown there is a 10,800 square foot office building, the development plan for which was approved by the Plan Commission at their November 16 meeting. And let me focus in. When we did the variance back in March, one of the rationales for the variance is that this property over time has kind of been chipped away and dedicated right of way off of US 421 over the years. And I wanted to show you kind of what's remaining and how the property orients to Michigan Road. So hopefully you can see this. This is a tight shot of the northern perimeter of the parking lot. And US 421 is immediately north. And you'll see, let me just point out, kind of starting to the right of the drawing and then moving back left, I'll talk a little bit about the dimensions and the various aspects of the property. That first line, maybe I can even use my cursor here. This line right here is a measurement from the edge of the new traffic lane that's being installed really as we speak to the back curb of the parking lot. And that measures 53 feet right along here. Where my cursor is now is a 12-foot recreational path, which is a requirement that I think came after the overlay zone was adopted to install these perimeter recreational paths along the frontages of both 146th Street and Michigan Road. That 12-foot path is within a 20-foot what we're calling a right of way. It's really an easement that's been dedicated to the town. And that 20-foot easement is itself within this 30-foot buffer, which we're maintaining. We're not seeking to shrink the 30-foot buffer in any way. And so that's how the property kind of lays out. This last one, I'll go ahead and mention, this is the 50-foot half right of way for US 421. So the property has significant separation from the new turn lane to the edge of the property being 53 feet, and will maintain the 30-foot buffer yard. And then we would simply place the landscaping treatments as required under the ordinance in the 30-foot buffer yard. And show you what that looks like. This is the landscape plan that was also included in your packet that shows the landscaping treatments for the project. And it's a combination of various plant species. It's very dense plantings. It includes shrubbery, evergreen shrubs, as well as various ornamental trees along the northern perimeter. We maintain all of the interior landscaping required for the interior of the parking lot itself. Unlike the variances sought and obtained back in March, we are maintaining our foundation plantings. We've just moved those out a little bit from the building itself. This building sets up for that better than the project that was approved back in March. And then we're also seeking, and this is an important aspect of the project, we are not seeking to eliminate or reduce the total number of plantings required under the ordinance. We're going to maintain the same level of total plantings, except essentially reallocating them within the property itself. And I think in the staff report, it looked like Roger had actually shown where those plantings would be moved to the east as well to provide additional screening to the east of the proposed building and parking lot that's in the rear of our building as well. So what we think we wind up with is kind of a good balance that we don't have to give up yet another strip of land. We maintain the robust landscaping, and we maintain the same level of plantings throughout the property and provide that additional screening to the east. We'd also like to maintain, obviously, the same landscaping treatments for this parcel as we have for the previously approved parcels, and that's our intention going forward as well. I should mention that Greg Snelling, our project engineer, is also on the call with me this evening, and he and I'd be available to answer any questions that you have, and we'd respectfully request approval of our variance this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Price. And thank you for that thorough description. It certainly helped clarify some of the conversations we had back, I guess, several months ago. I guess in summary, the way I'm interpreting this, and you correct me where I go wrong, is this is the same ask that there was another variance request on the previous property, but when it comes to this setback, this is the same ask that you requested previously and that we approved, correct?
Yes, sir, it is. It's exactly the same, and it's the removal of the parking lot perimeter planning area requirement.
Yep. And although we don't work in the world of precedent, this would make the property consistent. In addition, I think what you demonstrated with the first exhibit was the fact that their property has been encroached upon. I'm not sure if that's the right term, but slowly whittled away because of the ever expanding Michigan Road, correct?
That's right. Over the history of the property, that's correct. And that's how the travel lanes have been able to be added without using even all of the right of way that's been dedicated up to this point.
And I generally try to avoid doing math in public, but if you look at the edge of the curb of the parking lot and you go out 30 feet, that's on the other side of the pathway. And then
Correct.
if I'm reading it right, there will be an additional 23 feet before the road is there, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. Are there any other questions for the petitioner's representative tonight?
Mr. Price, you said there was one lot further south from this one. Is that lot I?
No, it would be lot K.
Okay, so because I see this I and J are side by side, so there's one additional lot to the south of those two.
Correct.
And is the same thing anticipated for that, or do you know what goes there yet?
We don't know the precise use, but I do anticipate the same request would be made at that time and to follow the same pattern. Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Actually, I do have a question. I've been comparing this project to the project coming up here later on Outlet I. This parcel has no connection to the access drive.
Say again.
My concern is the plans that are coming up for Outlet I show no connection from Outlet I to Outlet J.
Oh, that their site plan does not show that?
Correct.
I see.
In fact, it has trees planted where the drives connect.
Yeah, and I was made aware of that this afternoon by Mr. Oakes, now on deck. And my understanding was that initially those connection points were being driven in part by a request by the fire department, but that may have changed. That's something that he and I are still working out.
These outlots are sold to the entities that are developing the buildings on them, correct?
They are in those instances where, yeah, in the outlot to Mr. Oakes's client is being sold. The one that we're speaking about with relation to outlet J is being owned by Mr. Harris, retained by Mr. Harris.
So I've got to presentation in front of me for a development on outlet I that I've got some concerns with, that is not showing any connection to outlot J. So does outlot J, if they have to provide connectivity to the interior boulevard, do they have the same parking issue that outlot I will have? I mean, I understand Mr. Harris is going to own outlot J, or the development is going to outlot J, but so far what you've been putting together is a development where these outlots are being sold to different entities.
Correct. Is the question, did you ask if the connection points do not exist, then does outlot J have the same parking issue?
Correct.
And I do not know the answer to that question.
Okay. Well, why don't we continue this project until you guys can figure out what you're doing?
Mr. Jones, can you be specific on,
Outlot J has no access to a public road.
and take it one step further, are you concerned that if that was granted to outlot I, that it would consume some of the parking spots that are currently?
No, currently the proposal we have coming up here later for outlet I, if you look at the site plan, there is no connectivity. There's no road connection, drive connection between I and J. And my understanding is outlet I is going to be sold to a separate party. Although Mr. Harris will continue to own outlot J, develop outlot J, and then sounds like he's got an offer to lease it to a dentist as a primary tenant. It's got no access to the roads. And so,
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Jones.
yeah, I mean, is that making sense? Are you're looking at the drawing? You're
I
looking
am.
at the drawing he's providing.
Mr. Price, what are your thoughts on this concern?
Well, I do not believe it affects the variance that we're requesting, the variance we have in front of you for the parking lot perimeter.
Wait a minute, I'm correct. Wait a minute.
Combination.
There's an access on the south side of the property back. There's like a shared easement between the two properties.
Correct.
All right, I didn't see that. I was looking at the landscaping plan down through there, and all of a sudden it occurred to me that it didn't seem to have any access. So the access is over there on the left. So basically the parcel IJK will also need to grant, so there'll be an easement between the two properties to allow an access drive.
That's right.
But still, is the fire department requesting access between J and I?
What I was informed of today is that they are not, and they simply asked us to work out how those two properties were going to connect together between the landowners. I believe Mr. Oakes can verify that he had that conversation.
So is the site plan we're looking at correct or incorrect?
It's correct. It's the approved plan. If we have to, if for some reason that needs to change as between my client and Mr. Oakes, that's something we would have to address in a subsequent conversation. Whether that amounts to something that's a material change to the site plan or not, from Wayne's perspective and from the Plans Commission's perspective, that'd be something to take up at that time. But I don't think it affects the variance that we're requesting here.
Yeah, the variance is just across the front.
Right.
Okay, so trying to get this back to where I understand it. It appears that this particular parcel, this proposed development does have access to the road on what I'm describing, I think that would be the southeast corner.
Correct.
It may or may not, and sometime share access with the property to its north, which we're going to discuss in a few moments. But what the ask is for tonight is for the variance to eliminate the 6-foot perimeter planting strip, which is consistent with what we've looked at in the past. And okay, I think I'm there. Any other discussion amongst the group? Okay, seeing none right now, I believe we need to ask, is there anyone who wishes to speak for or against this particular project?
If there are any attendees wishing to speak, please raise your hand. Mr. Wolf, there are no hands raised.
Thank you, Roger. Wayne, I will turn it over to you for the staff report.
Thank you. This petition, as this board has discussed, is reminiscent of other action items you've heard and providing for the precedent-setting moment, if you will, as mentioned earlier. Your focus has been to support this specific combination of variances to allow this development to be developed in the totality of the reduction of the landscaped yard in the front, while providing for that same level of landscaping to be dispersed throughout each individual outlot. Staff is supportive and remains supportive of that thought process. Certainly this matter was heard by the Plan Commission. Part of the approval process focused on the outlot discussion. That matter and Appaloosa Crossing matters remain pending with the Plan Commission. Of course, some have been approved throughout time, and we will see other matters proposed here in the future. Again, staff is recommending approval of the petition as it's been filed, and I'm happy to answer any specific questions you may have. Specific to the question on major versus minor amendments, a major amendment is an addition of a curb cut. This specific deletion of the curb cut, since it's internal to the property, it would not rise to a major amendment. A major amendment would be if you were deleting a curb cut or adding a curb cut to the roadway system. I'll double check that language in the ordinance here. I haven't gotten all the way through to that page yet, but I believe that's what we will find, and certainly happy to provide an update, and certainly happy to answer any specific questions that may come up.
Thank you, Wayne. Any questions for staff? Mr. Jones, are you, I think your observations are keen and on point. Do you have concerns with this particular variance as it relates to?
No, the variance is something we've been approving multiple occasions. That's
Okay.
not an issue.
Okay. Is there any other discussion amongst the group? And if not, I will entertain a motion.
I move that docket.
I move that docket number 2020-37-DSV, being a development standards variance for the removal of the requirement of a 6-foot wide parking lot perimeter planting area with the landscaping to be allocated to the eastern portion of the subject site along the interior access drive as depicted on the landscape plan filed in docket number 2020-37-DSV, Exhibit 4, to be approved based upon the findings of facts and subject to the proposed commitments as presented.
I would note, do we have any proposed commitments in front of us?
No.
I think he's referring to the landscape plan.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Price. I would be amenable to that. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Mundy. Thank you, Ms. Campins. I will turn it over to Wayne for a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Mr. Mundy.
Aye.
Mr. Wolf.
Aye.
Mr. Papa.
Aye.
Mr. Jones.
Aye.
Mrs. Campins.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Price. The motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Next item on our agenda is docket number 2020-38-DSV for the property located at 3263 South US 421. Well, can we please promote the petitioner's representative forward? I guess I'm hesitating all of a sudden, Roger. I noticed that these two, what is the address for the previous petition? Do we have that correct on file? I think you're on mute, sir.
Yes, we do.
Okay. I just was expecting them to be closer together, but they apparently aren't.
One address has been assigned, the other site has not received a formal address yet.
I understand. Thank you very much. Mr. Oakes, welcome to our conversation. Would you please state your name and address for the record?
Yes, Chair, members of the board, for the record, Tim Oakes, Attorney at Ice North, offices at 1 American Square, Suite 2900, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46282-0200. Here this evening on behalf of the petitioner, 21st Amendment. Kind of feel like my hearing started in the hearing before. This is the Outlot I, which is directly adjacent to Outlot J, which was the subject of the last hearing. We are requesting two variances. One variance is identical to that which was proposed and granted for Outlot J, and also for the other outlot further to the north in Appaloosa Crossing. That is the elimination of the 6-foot parking lot buffer. And we certainly are amenable and agree to having no reduction in the required amount of landscaping. It'll just be reallocated to other areas of the site so that the same amount of plant material will be put on the property. It's just a reduction or loss of that 6-foot buffer area. And again, the same reasons would apply as before, which is, the amount of distance between back of curb to the property line is 53 feet. 30 feet is a buffer. And then you've got an additional 23 feet to back of curb. Adding another 6 feet just makes things more problematic, and from our perspective is not necessary if we maintain the same amount of landscaping. And at this point, I think it's also important to maintain some consistency in terms of that frontage along US 421. So that's one variance. The second variance is one for parking. And I'll get into a little bit the issues that were raised by Mr. Jones with respect to the access points. This site is pending development plan approval. We have not yet been to the plan commission, so it is subject to some modification. We anticipate it being very, very similar to the site plan that is in your packet, but it could change. We were made aware, I think it was the day or so before Thanksgiving, about the access points from Outlot J, and then reached out, and we've had initial conversations and need to continue those. We did go through TAC, however, which included the participation of the fire marshal, Marshal Frost, who did indicate at TAC on the record that those access points were not necessary for this site. Now we need to clarify with him, what is necessary for Outlot J, and we'll work through that issue. And that will be incorporated into our site plan in terms of the resolution of the cross access that may or may not exist on these properties. If it does exist with respect to the requested parking variance, our variance is one that's not based on number of spaces, but based on the ratio. The ordinance ratio is reflected in the staff report. Is ordinarily 1 space per 200 square feet, and we're asking to move that to 1 to 300 square feet. So if those were put in and it impacted our parking spaces, we, quite honestly, we at that point, we'd probably need to adjust the size of our building down slightly to accommodate those drives. But that's something we'll work through. And because of and because we're asking to use the ratio as the basis for the variance as opposed to just a straight numbers, then that gives us a little bit of flexibility to resolve that issue. And at the end of the day, we want to resolve that issue so that we make the fire marshal happy, and this is done appropriately. My client is buying this outlot from Mr. Harris, and it is part of the Appaloosa Crossing project. So they have been working together in that regard. With respect to the parking reduction, staff has noted that we've indicated that in our experience for this is intended to be a liquor store, an upscale liquor store that includes a tasting room, more upscale, higher end wines and spirits in a tasting room. And the parking ratio of 1 to 200 square feet with over 50 years of experience and over 20 sites is excessive. And we don't want to put in hard surface blacktop that isn't necessary. It's not, it's expensive, and it's not good for the environment. We also are, as part of the overall Appaloosa Crossing Center, there is a declaration with cross easements in terms of parking. So if for some strange reason additional parking were ever necessary, that would be available for the center. But we think the 1 to 300 ratio is more than adequate for the site. We don't anticipate any parking issues whatsoever. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the board might have.
Thank you, Mr. Oakes. The 1 to 300 is based on 50 years of experience in the alcohol store industry.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if it is no longer a liquor store?
Well, two things. One, except for relocating to a larger facility or relocated because a lease runs out or condemnation in 50 years, 21st Amendment has never closed the facility. Don't anticipate doing that anytime in the near future. But having said that, the answer to that is twofold. One, again, this is part of a larger commercial center where, if need be, additional parking is available in the center. And then number two, we think 1 to 200 as a standard for this type of outlot space is excessive. Now, this is a different location fundamentally than, let's say, the Village. People coming to this facility because of what is the barrier of Michigan Road, they're not going to be walking to the site. They're not going to be they're going to be driving. And quite frankly, if there isn't enough parking, which again we don't believe to be the case, for whatever use it might be besides the liquor store and tasting room, they're not going to come. It isn't like the Village where you can park at some part of the Village and then go to a different store, unless you consider the center itself like the Village. Yeah, they could park somewhere else at the center and walk here, but other than that, the only person that the ratio would harm, quite frankly, would be the owner and operator of this property and nobody else. It's not going to, in terms of the criteria for the variance, it isn't going to harm the the public's health, safety, or welfare, and it isn't going to be injurious to the rest of the property at the center. The center, at the end of the day, as with almost any large commercial center, is inevitably overparked and overparked significantly. And so we think the criteria are met, even if it would change use, which we don't anticipate. We think it would be fine.
Mr. Oaks, do you have an as I think about your client, I think about cooler space. You mentioned a tasting room. Do you have any sort of gauge on how much of this 1,250 square feet is retail space? And by that, I mean where a customer could walk around versus storage space?
If you knock out the storage space, the cooler space, and then the tasting room space, you're probably looking at around 7,000 to 8,000 square feet of what I'll call floor space. But now that doesn't exclude interior display cases. It doesn't exclude the point of sale, cash register locations, and things of that sort. That would be included in that 7,000 to 8,000 square feet.
Now, I would you certainly make the point that if we had another use, it would probably be a retail use, as that would be permittable, and they would have cash register space. But they probably, depending on what the use is, they may not have a tasting room. They probably wouldn't have a need for a cooler and other things like that. And if it is 8,000 square feet of retail space, this is not the way the ordinance is written, but if it's 8,000 retail of usable space for customers, that's approximately 40 parking spots. That's not the way the ordinance is written. What other questions do we have for the petitioner at this time?
I don't know if they're, go ahead.
With the tasting room, would that include some kind of events? Would they host events?
Tastings have become popular, and people do them just with their friends. They're also, every once in a while, you'll see a tasting that's done as a fundraiser. Actually went to a bourbon tasting at a tasting room it was actually a fundraiser for a charity. What we've discovered with the tasting room is 21st Amendment has started to include those in their buildings. And for example, they have a very nice tasting room at their facility at 146th and Curie Road in Westfield, is that people that know they're going to tastings don't want to drive. Don't mind driving there. What they want to avoid is driving when they leave. And what's really helped out kind of almost in the industry would characterize as a boom in tasting rooms has been the rise of services like Uber, where people are coming to the tasting and being dropped off and then Ubering home. Or you've got one designated driver and he or she is bringing everybody. That's been our experience now for the last 3 or 4 years in Westfield. The tasting room, surprisingly, even for somewhat sizable tasting events, doesn't generate very much parking at all.
Okay, just for knowledge, what is the occupancy for a tasting like that?
Well, there'll be a size limit in terms of how many people you could have in a room based on applicable fire code. We can't alter that, but the sizes vary anywhere from 5 people to maybe 25 to 30. Once you start getting above that number, it's not an enjoyable experience because you're you can't, there's the people that are putting on the tasting, which are usually, you know, representatives from either distributors or from distilleries themselves. They don't have the ability to interact with that many people. One, two, if you're tasting and you have to wait in line for a half an hour just to get a little taste, no one likes that. And so that's roughly about the size of the tastings that occur. You get much larger, it's not a good experience.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
I guess I've got a couple comments as usual. Nothing personal, Tim, but
Mm.
while 21st Amendment has 50 years of history, the 300 to 1 or the 200 to 1 ratio is based on 50 years of history of what's been put in place in our zoning ordinance, which has been adopted from multiple other ones. You just heard all the comments probably about the village district and their parking issues. And so I don't really have much interest in actually kind of backing off what the ordinance requests. When this entire development was done, the developers had the option of how they parceled out their lots, and they should have known full well what the requirements should be. I understand you're coming to the table with your project, but as I go back through the documentation regarding this parcel, there's always been about a 10,000 square foot building on it. I do take exception to your comment about the environment. You know, 42 parking spaces in a 12,000 foot building or 60 spaces in a 10,000 foot building, it's the same amount of hard surface. There is no difference whether the water is coming off the roof or coming off the parking lot. The water is the water is the water. Also regarding cross easements and, you know, the entire development of this site, I did a little checking, and while an overall general plan has been provided for Appaloosa Trail, the only thing it's really committed to are these outlots. And the only thing really committed to drainage wise is to service those outlots. And while we keep looking at a plan for a larger kind of, you know, commercial strip integrated center development, there's no commitments really to do that. And if general back channel information I get, there's a chance it's not going to happen. So for me, I need to look at this just like the comments I made earlier. This is a standalone parcel, period. The 21st Amendment is going to buy. I'm very glad that they want to bring a facility here. The fact that they want to create a tasting room, once again, I've got experience with that in multiple buildings that I already own. A tasting room is an event type use, which is actually going to drive more peak demand and need for the parking lots. And finally, I really, really, really want to question these findings of fact. You know, number one, you know, the grant will not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, general welfare of the community because, and your answer is the resulting number of parking spaces is adequate to handle the parking demand for a liquor store, and the reduction is paved hard surface will benefit the environment. Once again, I believe that just to be false. It does not meet the standard of the finding of fact. The second one about, you know, use or value of the adjacent areas. Once again, we have no hard commitments as to what the adjacent area really is going to be. So you really can't make that statement. And finally, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance, you know, results in an unnecessary hardship. No, it does not. You know, this lot was designed and parceled off, and the whole development was done knowing full well that these were the zoning requirements that were going to be in place once it was done. There is no hardship. So and finally, you know, like I said, when it comes to findings of fact, I'm a little sensitive to them since I've had people take issues with mine in the past. So I get a little more concerned about them, especially when it gets to large scale commercial developments where they do have impact and the people affected by them have the resources to take the town to task. And that is my message to the rest of the members of the BZA is while we may approve things when it comes to residential findings of fact that might seem a little chatty, when it comes to commercial development and what we approve and the findings of fact do begin to form a record of what people can expect to hold us to in the future. And if we don't allow it in the future, it puts the town of Zionsville in a position that they could be held, you know, they could have to defend that position. So that's about it.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
What, if I could just reply just to one part of that. If you take a look at the site plan that's in your packet and it shows a 12,500 square foot building. And I think, Mr. Jones, you said, well, if you lop off, 2,500 square feet of that and go to a 10,000 square foot building and increase the number of parking spaces, you have the same number of hard surface. And I suppose conceptually, I understand that statement, but as a practical matter, if you're going to lop off 2,500 square foot of this building, given the shape of and size of this lot, where do you add the extra spaces? I mean, you've got a row, like take the front of the building as it faces Michigan Road. You've got a row of parking along the building and a row of parking along Michigan.
It's not a concern of ours to play architect.
Squeeze it in. Well, I mean, that's part of the practical difficulty is the size of this lot, which we didn't create, we're buying.
Right.
You reduce it by 2,500 square feet. There isn't space. There isn't parking spaces require a certain dimension and maneuvering area to go with them. And if you reduce that,
of the developer of the site, not of the Board of Zoning Appeals.
the result may be that this just doesn't get done. Then that would be a shame. This is a variance that the developer of the entire center, and it is zoned for an entire commercial center. Whether there is a desire to move forward with it or not, I don't know. That comes as a surprise to me, and I suspect it will come as a surprise to my client. Thank you for letting me know. But that's what it's zoned for.
Prior to this, what I do is make calls within our within people working and involved in the project, just trying to find out what is actually approved and not approved. And my understanding is we don't have really a full development approval. Wayne, am I speaking out of turn? Am I wrong? This is not a PUD. There is not a commitment for the full development of this site just yet.
Right, you do not have a development plan approved for the totality of the acreage. I mean, what you're seeing, and I think what Mr. Jones is touching upon, typically you would see a development plan approval process for the entirety of a shopping center, and then the outlots would follow. This is following a different path, and that's the choice of the developer. But yes, there is a defined pattern that's happening related to the outlots. And in the back, the larger acreage, there's been discussion of originally a anchor type tenant. More recently, there's been conversations about a residential development of some nature, but certainly the finite granular details of that would be defined and articulated in some sort of future hearing process.
So to my point, we can't really rely on the fact that there will be the opportunity for future cross easements to provide additional parking. Because Tim, I just looked at the site there at 146th and Cary, and that site shared with 3 or 4 other buildings and other uses, correct?
That building in which they're located is their entire building, but there is other commercial uses around it. You are correct.
All right.
And we've been told, to be honest with you, that this was going to be a commercial center. We've been provided with a copy of the proposed declaration. We're counting on that.
Okay.
So like I said, I'm if this is true, I'm glad to know it, but that is not what we've been told.
It's all I'm doing is looking at the information I have presented to me and doing the research available to me. It's the same thing about the connection between lots I and J. Is it or isn't it? Is it, you know,
I would tell you no, but
okay. Yeah, all I'm asking for is just a consistency in the presentation of what I'm seeing, so we can make sure that whatever we're approving, we're not getting out of the guidelines of what we're supposed to be doing. And we're not doing, what's the spot zoning? Isn't that the death knell of all this stuff, that we make special exceptions for different spots at different times? Isn't that the death knell of a town governing board?
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Any other comments or questions for the petitioner's representative at this time?
Well, I guess it's in the staff report, it represents that the petitioner says based on their experience, they don't need as much parking. Is that because trips to a liquor store are typically shorter than most retail, or?
that's a large part of it. You know, people that come to a liquor store, you know, outside of something that involves the tasting room. And again, our experience is that doesn't generate as much traffic as you would think, because people don't want to drive away from a tasting. If they're in to buy, simply come to buy wine or spirits or beer, you're right. It's a quick in and out. Usually, exceptions, but usually.
Any other questions for the petitioner at this time? Roger, is there anyone who would like to speak for or against this particular matter from the public?
Yes, Matt Price has raised his hand. I will allow him to speak.
Thank you. Matt Price speaking on behalf of the property owner Harris FLP. Just a couple of things. One, with regard to the statement regarding spot zoning, this is a 50+ acre parcel that's been zoned for the very use to which Mr. Oakes's client would like to put it for some time now. And the retail center itself was approved originally back in 2008. It's received thorough vetting by the Zionsville Plan Commission for the last few years. And we've worked very closely with the Plan Commission to, I think, arrive at a very well considered and thought out development that is informed by pages of zoning commitments that call for a first class integrated commercial center. Back at the end of 2019, we also received permission to do a residential development between the outlots and the Willow Glen subdivision to the east. And we've been very upfront with the town and with the Plan Commission throughout this entire process that we are currently under contract with an empty nester developer. We've met with the Willow Glen subdivision routinely. We're scheduled again to appear before their HOA in January, and have apprised both the Plan Commission, our neighbors, and our commercial clientele of the development. So it's not at all accurate to say that this project is somehow not going forward or is not properly zoned. I don't think anything could be more contrary than that. And certainly Mr. Jones has taken issue with various stages of the project, but the Plan Commission has seen fit to approve this and allow it to go forward. And we're doing so in a responsible fashion. Mr. Oakes is correct that we do have a master declaration for the project that addresses, among other things, cross easements for parking, for access, ingress and egress, for drainage. We have a master development or master drainage plan for the entire project that's been vetted. I might also add it complies completely with Zionsville stormwater control ordinance. It's being implemented at an enormous cost to this developer to meet the very onerous requirements of Zionsville stormwater control ordinance. And so we've worked very hard through each stage of the process. It would be devastating for us to not be able to go forward with the 21st Amendment sale, which has always been a key element of our project and something that we've repeatedly spoken about as we work through the various phases of the project. I appreciate the opportunity
couple comments. Like I said, if the development is so fully vetted, there shouldn't be a need for this type of variance. The type of variance we have been granting regarding the setbacks and the land along 421 is solely to respect the fact that as Mr. Harris has tried to develop this, 421 and the state have made changes that have impacted the property. So there we're trying to be flexible. The term spot zoning is probably improper, but when it comes to this concept of granting kind of site-specific variances to change things, I kind of disagree. Finally, when it comes to the great burden about meeting the strict Zionsville stormwater management, rules and regulations, that is the same thing that we held Holiday Farms to. That is the same thing we've held every project to. It's the same thing, and ours is basically the same as Westfield and Carmel's, and it provides an integrated level of stormwater management all across the northern end of Indianapolis, which, since we've got Little Eagle Creek running through Lions Park, we're the ones that bear the brunt oftentimes for other areas not maintaining the standard. So I don't see any reason why we should ever bring up the fact that somebody's being burdened by holding up a standard that everyone else is.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Roger, is there anyone else from the public?
There are no other hands raised.
Thank you. Wayne, I think that puts you up next.
Thank you. Certainly happy to speak to the matter that's in front of you. Is the two variances that have been requested. First is the reduction in perimeter landscaping planting strip. Certainly this is an item that you've addressed on several occasions now. This is a development standard item specific to providing for the same look, feel, and finish that other outlots in this development have enjoyed and have been approved for. Specific to the parking variance that's been requested. As Mr. Jones points out, we have an ordinance that has standards in it that have been established and fit the town, and its urban center has a certain district, and the rural center, the rural balance of that has its own parking ratios. And those ratios do not necessarily take into account every single use and every single operational practice that is contemplated. These ordinances are very general, and the parking standards are that they are just standards. Certainly, the staff is always very interested to hear from petitioners who have specific operational experiences and can speak to what they believe their standards should be to facilitate their operation. And more importantly, but equally in the same breath, is the fact that when you're in an integrated center and there's shared parking agreements or shared the ability to share cross-access easements or even lack thereof, human nature will park you and place you where you need to be to get to the store that you need to get to. And in the same breath, you do have other items that are simply not addressed in our zoning ordinance. Autonomous vehicles, ride sharing, and we do have items in our ordinance specific to bicycles and other types of methods of mobility, but certainly golf carts and other pieces and other tools are out there and being used today. And certainly we look forward to the opportunity to update our ordinances specifically with this form-based code process that we look to kick off early next year. With all that said, staff is supportive of the request that petitioners brought forward specific to the parking ratios simply based upon their market experience. and simply noting, Mr. Wolf's comments earlier regarding if a different tenant moved in and used the building differently, is that a piece of this conversation that should be integrated into some sort of motion if this board's inclined to favorably consider the request? Certainly, that's a good thing to put out there. Some lane markers, if you will, some limits on one end or the other. It sounds like it was a 7,000 to 8,000 square feet of this space is the active retail, regardless of the marketing placements inside of all the merchandise. The rest of the space is for activity space or certainly cold storage. Again, staff is supportive of the petition as it's been filed, with some sort of caveat related to if there's a change in tenancy, what would that do to the parking ratios? I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Wayne. What questions do we have for staff? Seeing none, I think this is going to warrant some conversation, and I'll start it. And I'm going to avoid the 6-foot buffer. I think I've got my hands around that. And I think Mr. Jones brought up an interesting challenge to, I certainly appreciate the third finding of fact. So I would like to discuss that in a moment. But additionally, if one of the comments made by the petitioner's representative is that if there was, a need for 43 spaces, they could just use the adjoining parking. But I think we have a challenge there because there may not be, you may end up walking across to a landscaping medium, because I don't know if they're the two parking lots at this point, we don't know if they're going to be joined or not. I could envision a scenario, again, if there are 42 people, 42 patrons with cars in the store, you drive around the lot, create congestion, you have to leave and then go into the lot immediately to the south. You have to go back onto the access road, go to the lot. It just doesn't seem like a natural fit for me. So I'm a little bit challenged by that. I do think the petitioner's representative is probably accurate in whatever time I've been into a liquor store. I certainly have never seen 42 people in there, at least not one, not a traditional one. Maybe perhaps the new customer Total Wine might warrant that, but at this point, I don't think I've ever seen one in a traditional liquor store layout. However, this ordinance isn't tied to the liquor store. It's tied to this particular parcel. And so if the parcel changes, again, Mr. Jones is correct that, we're establishing that 42 spots is adequate. I think it was 42. So I have some concerns there. I could be mediated by that if we were to limit the fact that if any future tenant would limit the retail space to what is the standard, which would be 8,000 square feet, and then the remaining 4,500 would have to be some sort of storage or non-retail space, probably would satisfy my concerns. And then I think, I guess, Mr. Oakes, I want to challenge you on finding the fact 3. The standard is that you have to provide it based on 200 square foot. And I guess, what is the reason you can't meet that standard?
If we would have to meet the parking standard, we would have to shrink the size of the building. And shrinking the size of the building, and I think for 42 spaces, you're at 8,400 square feet total. If you took 4,000 square feet off of this building, it might be possible to get in additional parking spaces. You wouldn't need to at that point. So you're taking off because you already have the 42 spaces. The trick here is taking off some portion of the building so that you can add parking spaces to the site. So if you look at the site plan and you say, okay, let's squeeze the building in an east-west direction, how far do you have to squeeze that to add a row of parking? If you squeeze it from a north-south direction, how far do you have to squeeze it to add a row of parking? Because that's the only way you can add parking on this site. And squeezing it that much you're not going to be able to add those additional parking spaces. It just isn't going to work. That's because the parking ratio, again, from our perspective, and this just is not just for liquor stores, but in general, our experience, and my client does own centers where they bought them. They have a liquor store in one part of the center and other retail uses, including restaurants in the other. That is a parking ratio that is high.
So
that's the, I don't know how we can't, the orientation, the size of this lot, it's either we get a variance or we probably would have to live with an 8,400 square foot building, and that might kill this deal.
So I don't want to oversimplify anyone's problem, and I certainly am not a parking expert, but it appears that the distance between, as you look at the west facing, the lot in Michigan Road, the spots are 19 feet deep. There's 24 feet of space between the spots, and then you have 2 rows of spots there. So if you apply that same logic to the north side of the building, you have a building who is 125 feet long, and you already have 24 feet of space between that. And so all you would need to do is take off 125 feet at 125 length by 19 depth, and you end up with something like, hang on, I just did the math again. I generally try to avoid that in public. 125 times 19, it's 2,300. Let's call it 2,400 square feet. So now you're down to 10,000 square feet. And at that point, you only need 50 spots, and you will easily accommodate that in that area. Now, again, I have just oversimplified a problem that architects do, and I'm not an expert. I'm not an architect. So I don't, but it does seem like there's an option there. Maybe there's other reasons it's not possible, but there is an option. What other questions do we have for the petitioner's representative?
Maybe the thing to do here, if I might be so bold, is to suggest that I could go back to our site designer, our civil engineer at Red Barn Engineering Company, and work with them to see if we could reduce the size of the building and get closer to the parking ratio. Honestly, we're also, from a parking perspective, if we add in the cuts to Outlot J, that's going to eliminate probably our ability to add parking spaces on the south side of the lot.
But you currently don't have any, correct?
I don't. But if we're trying to adjust this to get closer to the ratio, we're going to want to look at all 4 sides to see what works best. Perhaps again, and if we could maybe move forward with the 6-foot buffer yard and then continue the hearing on the parking ratio, we'll go back to the drawing board and see what we can come up with to get closer to the ratio. I don't know if that's possible or not, but I'd like to have our engineer try.
Very good. Is any other discussion amongst the board members tonight before we kind of go down how we proceed forward?
I guess the only comment I'd make too is there's nothing cast in stone up there, is there? I mean, just 2 weeks ago, we reapproved the change in the lot lines for lot, what is it, J? My assumption, is that right? Matt, are you still out there somewhere? Matt Price?
Roger Comer can speak to what petition was just certified.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me, Larry?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, that's correct.
I mean, there seems to be a round of questions floating around about whether or not the fire department is going to require some sort of cross connectivity between the lots. I mean, you know, there's a fix, and right now the fix only involves pen and ink. A little time. I mean, there's nothing's dug in out there, right? There's no roads. There's no storm sewer in the ground. I know they're working on the retention pond up there on the south end, correct?
That in part was the reason for my suggestion, which is we need to have discussions between the Mr. Harris and my client, and then also have our engineer put new pen to paper.
I mean, I'll make a motion to approve the landscaping buffer portion if that helps move the project along.
Hang on one second, Mr. Jones. And I think it does maybe, but did we lose? Oh, there's Darren. You're right in the middle of my screen. Darren, we have one petition number, but we have two variances. I think generally we're probably as a group, I don't want to speak for everyone, but we need to hear a motion. But I think we're generally probably amendable to the 6 feet. Can we act on that and leave the other one alone and have a continuance on that one tonight? Is that?
You can.
Okay.
Yeah, and we might ask Wayne how he prefers to note that for his file, but yeah, you can do that.
I think we'd note the matter that you would be hearing tonight and taking a motion on. We would note that as the petition number, then the letter A would be after that petition number. And then the matter that would be continued to be assigned the letter B after the same petition number.
Okay. Did you say A as an apple and B as in boy?
Correct.
Okay. So as I speak to my fellow board members, we're referring to variance request number 2. Are we going to call that one B?
I think for tracking purposes, let's go with what you just described.
Okay. So variance request number 2 will end up being docket number 2020-38-B-DSV.
Sounds fine.
Perfect. Thank you. I don't want to be flippant about that. Is there any discussion about the 6-foot buffer? And if not, I would entertain a motion on docket number 2020-38-B-DSV.
Move the docket number 202038B DSV variance request number 2 being a development standards variance for the removal of the requirement of a 6-foot wide parking lot perimeter planning area with the landscaping to be allocated areas along the interior access drives as depicted on the landscape plan filed in docket number 201935 DSV Exhibit 4 be approved as filed based on the findings of fact and subject to the proposed commitments as presented.
Thank you very much, Mr. Papa. Is there a second to that motion?
A second.
Thank you, Ms. Campins. Wayne, I'll turn it over to you for a roll call vote.
Certainly. Mr. Papa.
Aye.
Mr. Jones.
Aye.
Ms. Campins.
Aye.
Mr. Mundy.
Aye.
Mr. Wolf.
Aye. Thank you. Motion carries. Now, I want to be specific, Mr. Oakes, on what we're asking for. And thank you for offering to try to work with the engineering firm to make the proposal a little more palatable. I think I also would encourage you to work with Mr. Price, as I know you will, on the connection between the two lots, because I do think that is a variable that may or may not affect your hardships. If you lose the ability to have spaces on the south side of their lot because you're required to have connections, that is something that you should consider in that. And so to whatever extent you can have that clarity, the next time we discuss this, I think it would be helpful for all of us.
Agreed.
Mr. Oakes, do you have we been clear on what we're asking for?
Yes, I understand.
Very good. For that, I would entertain a motion to continue docket number 2020-38-A-DSV.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, for the motion. Thank you, Mr. Papa, for the second. Mr. DeLong, I'll turn it to you.
Mr. Jones.
Aye.
Mrs. Campins.
Aye.
Mr. Mundy,
Aye.
Mr. Wolf,
Aye.
Mr. Papa.
Thank you. And I should have asked this before. Mr. Oakes, is it appropriate to move this petition to the January 6th meeting?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So it'll just move down the line like we expect. The continuance motion carries. Thank
And
you.
Thank you for everyone's input. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oakes. Next item on our agenda is, I'm sorry, other matters to be considered, of which I would note that we do have a new meeting coming up. The next meeting will be January 6th per our regular schedule. And I hope to work with the town and the staff to have a proposed and revised schedule going forward. Correct, Wayne?
Correct. What you'll be finding is your rules of procedure themselves, of course, articulate the actual date, which is the first Wednesday of the month. What we do want to work through is a schedule of filings and dates and deadlines for the public to rely upon. Right now, we're utilizing what is the traditional schedule that we've always used. We look, as we described, we look to spread that out a little bit to give ourselves a few extra days to take petitions, and we'll present that in totality at your January meeting.
Very good. Are there any other matters to be considered at this time?
Nope.
Very good. With nothing else, this meeting is adjourned.
Good night.